Hi, let's take a peek inside Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. This is arguably the most famous piece of orchestral music ever written. Almost everybody knows the very, very first four notes of the symphony. I'm fascinated by seeing the autographed manuscripts of composers. These are the actual notes on the actual page that composers wrote with their own hand, with old pen and ink in a very, very long-standing kind of style. Through the beauty of the internet, we're actually able to see these things now. And through the courtesy of the State Library of Berlin, they have actually put online the autographed manuscript of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So we are able to look at this page and know that this is exactly what Beethoven wrote. He wrote those first four notes, bum, 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 right there. He wrote a tempo marking, allegro, and then he crossed something out and then wrote con brio in big letters with fire to tell us how fast it goes. And we see the distribution of the instruments, the violins and violas at the top, the winds and the brass in the middle, and then finally the cello and bass at the bottom, which was the standard way of writing a score at that time. It's amazing to me to be able to actually see Beethoven's own handwriting. Now, the next step is how do we as performers translate what is written down on a page, in this case by Beethoven's own hand, into actual sound. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to compare several different recordings of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, some older, some newer, and see how different people approach it. Now on this first page, we actually have a couple of decisions to make. Number one is how fast to play these notes. Well, he told us allegro con brio, but then he gave us these fermatas, these holds, these stopping points in between. So that sort of disrupts the whole flow and the energy of it. So that's the other question, is how long do we actually hold those notes? So the first performance we're going to listen to is actually a pretty recent performance by the Detroit Symphony under the conductor Louis Langry. And we're just going to hear this very, very opening, and I'll help show where we are. So that's kind of a modern approach. It's pretty quick. The fermatas aren't held a real long time. And that gives us maybe a little bit of a benchmark. Now we're going to go back in time just a little bit. And we're going to go to a historical performance from an older tradition with the notes played slower, the fermatas held quite long. And this is a performance by the eminent conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler with the Berlin Philharmonic from 1947. It's pretty amazing how long he held those in comparison with what you just heard in the more recent version. And now we'll hear one that's kind of in the middle. This one from 1974 with the Vienna Philharmonic, conducted by actually one of my favorite conductors in all of history, somebody I admire very greatly, the conductor Carlos Kleiber. So there we have kind of a combination. We have quicker notes, but again, the longer fermata, and with less space in between those fermatas. So now I thought it would be interesting to take a look at one more place in this very, very famous piece of music. And that is the amazing transition between the end of the third movement, something that's very quiet and mysterious, that leads us very, very quickly directly into the triumphant grandeur of the beginning of the fourth movement. We're going to compare these same three performances, and we'll hear some big differences. And as you can see, it's kind of messy. It's sort of hard to figure out exactly what's going on. But as we listen to these, I'm going to point out a couple of things. Most prominently, we'll hear the timpani line, and it's very quiet at the beginning, but we'll be able to follow that as we follow this score page. We'll end up at the beginning of the fourth movement with the first entry in all of symphonic music of the piccolo, the trombones, and the contrabassoon, three instruments that Beethoven added first in this piece of music. First, we'll hear the performance by the Detroit Symphony. the timpani. Great. So there we are, finally, and here we see, actually for the first time, the piccolo, the trombones, and you see a few changes of mind as for which notes he's going to ask them to play. And then interestingly, down here at the bottom, he says contrabassoon with the basses, which is a typical way of writing that. Well, we'll go back to the beginning of that passage again, and now we'll listen to the older version, the version with the Berlin Philharmonic and Furtwängler. I think we'll hear something totally different. In this case, we'll hear something more expansive. It's actually a little halting in a way, and then before that climactic moment at the beginning of the fourth movement, he actually holds it longer than Beethoven asked, and then takes a big breath before it starts. Very different. I think you can hear immediately the difference, the slower tempo and all of that energy pent up that he gives that big breath to. And now finally we'll hear Kleiber's version with the Vienna Phil, which again is kind of somewhere in the middle. He starts incredibly softly, makes a huge crescendo, which is exactly what Beethoven calls for in a very, very short amount of time, and leads us then into that thrilling opening of the fourth movement. There we are. So these are just a couple little tastes of the kinds of decisions that we have to make as performers, and how interesting it is to compare different performances, and especially how fascinating it is to be able to look at Beethoven's own manuscript, to be able to answer some of these questions ourselves that come up. So after all of this, you might be asking, well, how are we going to do it? Well, I have to say, I think you're going to have to come and hear exactly what we're going to do to find out. I guess I gave you maybe a little hint in saying that Carlos Kleiber is one of the conductors I most admire. But there are certainly many things that are different about any live performance. And when you come to hear us perform this and hear the glory of the Richmond Symphony coming to full sonic splendor in the Carpenter Theater, I think you'll be fascinated by bringing this incredible piece of music to life. We'll look forward to seeing you there.